University here in Washington, D.C. He's also the author of The Decision to Go to the Moon, Project Apollo. Good morning. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning.
Why did this happen?
Well, approximately it happened because there was some sort of massive, structural failure that caused the shuttle to break up. This was at the peak of heating in the reentry as the shuttle came back into the atmosphere. Rather clearly, the left wing got very hot because they lost tire pressure. Almost certainly it means the tires blew. And the heat got to be at a level that the shuttle began to tear apart.
Could it have been prevented?
Who knows? You don't know what was the thing that started this chain of events. Whether it was this piece of debris that hit the left wing on takeoff 16 days ago, whether it was some of the 4 or 5 different options that technical people have already identified as possible causes for this. So until we know why it happened, you couldn't really say, could it have been prevented?
By early accounts, and as NASA has been clear to say, an investigation will begin in earnest to figure out what happened. But early accounts indicate that it was a perfectly normal descent into Earth until a minute or two before NASA realized that there was a problem.
I saw one thing this morning, it was in the New York Times story, that said people in California saw debris coming off the shuttle. That the shuttle was losing maybe its tiles even before it got down over Texas. And if that were true, then it wasn't a perfectly normal descent. But that's the only mention I've seen of that.
This is from the New York Times also, a look at some of the debris as it moved at 12:04 Eastern Standard Time, 12:43, and then 1:33. Based on your expertise, what would make up this debris and the scope of its path?
Yeah, if you're showing that image, that's fascinating because that's off of weather cameras. That's a geostationary satellite looking at weather patterns, and what you see is the heat caused in the atmosphere by the breakup of the shuttle, the various debris rains, and it basically showered from the skies over southeast Texas and Louisiana. So that's what you're seeing in that picture.
John Logsdon will be with us for the next 45 minutes. Our phone lines are open at 202-585-3880 for those of you who live in the Eastern and Central time zones. If you're in the Mountain and Pacific time zones, the number to call is 202-585-3881. And for our international viewers, 202-585-3883. So where does NASA go next?
Well, the immediate thing is to have an internal review, a review of people outside of NASA, certainly congressional and public debate that says, first of all, technically, what happened, why did it happen, how do we fix it? And then I think a broader policy and political debate about the future of human spaceflight. Realizing
that this is early, but one of the stories that has been developing over the last 24 hours is from Don Nelson, who served as a NASA official for almost 40 years, and he had been pushing for these crew capsule modules that the crew could escape from. Is that something that, if it had been in place on board the Space Shuttle Columbia, could it have saved their lives?
I doubt it. Again, I know Don has been one of those that's been raising alarms about the fragility and the safety of the shuttle system for a number of years. In hindsight, maybe he should have gotten more attention than he did. But at the altitude that this breakup happened, I'm not at all sure that there was any way, whether there was a self-contained capsule or anything else, for the crew to have survived.
Is America committed to space?
I think so. We have been putting people in orbit now since May of 1961. Well, in space since May of 1961, in orbit since John Glenn in February of '62. We are the managing partner in an international partnership to build and operate the space station. We're kind of 2/3 of the way through the building of it. The idea of abandoning that and just saying we quit and pull out and leave our partners high and dry seems to me really implausible. So I think we are committed to a long-term future in space and with human spaceflight.
It was more than 2 years from the time the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded in January of 1986 before we resumed any space projects on board the shuttle. Could we see that time period again with what happened yesterday?
Well, we could, but I kind of doubt it. Just from what preliminary information is available, it doesn't seem like this was a major design flaw that was going to cause redesign and requalification and retesting of something like the solid rocket booster, which is what took so long after Challenger. The cause of the accident was known within days. The formal investigation took a couple of months, but it recommended that the booster be redesigned and tested in many, many different ways before the shuttle was cleared to fly. At this point, I think this seems like it may have been an accident, something that was unavoidable and not something wrong with the fundamental design of the equipment.
Let's get to your phone calls. Norcross, Georgia, for John Logsdon. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you very much for your program, and thanks for your guests being there. I don't know who is monitoring America's exploration of space, but the whole Earth is involved in that. And I think that we need to have some more conscientious people around the world monitoring what is going on in space, how the development is taking place in space. The whole Earth is at America's rampant and irresponsible exploration of space. Bringing that ship down yesterday when they knew that there was damage was reckless. I think that we need to look at that and be a little more careful as to what goes on in space.
Thank you, caller.
Well, I mean, to say it was reckless to bring the ship down yesterday, it had to come down at some point. There was no way, if there were damage, there was really no way to repair it. So what do you do? I think reckless and irresponsible were a bit too strong of words.
Next call, San Jose. Good morning.
Morning. Thank you for my call, and I like to give my respects to the families of the astronauts. I got to make a comment. Everybody realized that where there's a cause, there's an effect. And I think that the reason why the shuttle fell down in Texas is because that's an oil state. And Bush raising this war on unjust war on Iraq.
Okay, I'll stop you there. Thank you very much for the call. But let me ask you about the debris that is on the ground in Texas now. What can they learn from that?
Well, we could hope that there are pieces that are both large enough and not so damaged by the heat of reentry that you can do some physical tracking of what actually happened as the shuttle broke up. We don't know. I mean, that debris is spread over hundreds of square miles. It's not just Texas, it's Louisiana, and apparently some in other places. Dangers of live television. My cell phone goes off. They will try to piece together as much of the shuttle as possible and see if they can get out of that some evidence of what actually was the chain of events that caused the breakup.
This is one of the many photographs in the papers this morning from the Washington Post as we show it to our audience, and we'll get another call. The Columbia passes over the Owens Valley Radio Observatory north of Bishop, California at 5:54 p.m. a.m., 5:54 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. The camera is pointed north, and the shuttle is passing from west to east and from the left to the right of the photo.
Right. And as I said earlier, there's one comment that sticks in my mind from the New York Times coverage that said that a Caltech astronomer, I believe, was looking at the shuttle and saw some debris coming off of the shuttle track. And if indeed the shuttle was losing tiles, that would be 4 or 5 minutes, maybe 6 minutes before it got over Texas. That suggested that the process that would lead to tiles coming off, heating of the aluminum surface of the shuttle, had already begun.
Next call is from Miami. Good morning for John Logsdon, who is the director of the Space Policy Institute, part of George Washington University. Go ahead, caller.
Good morning.
Was that me? Okay. So I'd like to say that picture you showed, I guess, several minutes ago, the red streak there in Louisiana, and you said it was from a satellite. Actually, that was from the Doppler radar at Shreveport, Louisiana. And what it is in the clear air mode. I'm a retired meteorologist from a weather service. So, it was in the clear air mode, and it's a very sensitive mode. It will pick up very, very small particles, whether it be cloud particles or whatever. And what that is showing is actually pieces of the shuttle. It's not showing up heat or anything. It's actually showing up the metal pieces or whatever of the shuttle. It's not picking up heat. It's actually picking up particles of the shuttle.
Well, thank you for that correction.
Next call is High Park, California. Good morning.
Good morning. If we knew, if NASA, if our government had any idea that there was something wrong with that shuttle before it deported the space station, or if we had an opportunity to have those astronauts remain on the space station where the other 3 astronauts are right now and wait for one of our other shuttles to come up to that station and bring them home, and instead NASA chose to send them back to Earth, knowing that that craft was in any slight way damaged, then those people in charge should definitely be held on criminal charges and be held accountable to the highest standards of our law.
Thank you, caller.
There's one problem with that, which is that this shuttle was nowhere near the space station. This crew was not on the space station. This was a self-contained orbital mission doing science in orbit aboard the shuttle. So there was no issue of crew staying on station because they were never there.
With about 80 experiments up until yesterday, NASA had claimed that the mission was highly successful. One of the news conferences that we covered on this network from last Wednesday with the 7 astronauts. Tom Hargrove has a Scripps Howard News Service story that is in today's Washington Times. Maintenance staffing cut by 1/3 since 1995. The staff assigned to oversee Space Shuttle maintenance has been cut by at least 1/3, prompting space agency authorities to warn Congress 2 years ago that manpower reductions pose significant shuttle program flight safety risks. A study released by the Congressional General Accounting Office back on August 15, 2000, found that the remaining shuttle maintenance employees showed, quote, signs of overwork and fatigue because of manpower shortages and increased frequency of shuttle missions as the U.S. began launching portions of the International Space Station, the workforce shrinking from 3,000 to 1,800 workers over a 5 to 6 year period.
That's clearly something that people are going to, all the investigators are going to look at is the staffing of the shuttle processing in preparation for launch. The judgment that managers have to make in the shuttle or any other high-tech program is this balance between available resources and how much you pay for the extra 1/100th of 1% of reliability. Clearly there's a possibility that the judgment that was made was flawed, that their maintenance was cut too much. There had, hindsight is wonderful. You can point to these reports that said that the people that had the responsibility for the program made the judgment that what was being provided was enough to have safe flights, and we'll now have to look at that judgment and see whether it was valid or not.
President Bush is at the White House today. He is expected to attend church services this morning here in Washington, D.C. There is expected to be a NASA briefing this afternoon, which we will cover here on C-SPAN. You can email us your comments at journal@cspan.org. This email from a viewer who says, in this tragedy, we can take solace in the fact that these 7 people have joined an honor roll of people of the history of civilization. These 7 gave their lives for the progress of mankind. For this, they are true American heroes, even heroes of the world, and for this, they will always be remembered. On board, as has been reported, an Israeli astronaut, the first ever from that country. When did we begin this program of bringing in those from other nations to fly aboard the Space Shuttle?
It began very early. After the shuttle was declared operational the 4th of July, 1982, after its first 4 flights. And soon we began to carry non-U.S. people, in particular those that were launching their satellites from the shuttle. We've carried a Saudi prince at one time. We've carried French astronauts, German astronauts, kind of around the world, Japanese astronauts. So people have been flying on the shuttle who are not Americans for a long, long time.
If you want to get more information on the Space Policy Institute, you can log on to C-SPAN's website. We have linked it. It is www.cspan.org, or you can log on directly to gwu.edu/SPI for Space Policy Institute.
One correction. Before the SPI, there's a little curvy thing called a tilde. So it's tilde SPI.
And what is the Space Policy Institute?
It's a graduate education, research, public and professional outreach organization that's part of GW's Elliott School of International Affairs. We've been there since 1987. It's one of the few places in the world where students can come and focus their studies on space issues in a non-technical basis. We've done lots of research projects, worked on the history of the program and on future policy issues.
Our guest has contributed a number of articles on space exploration and America's space program. He's also a current member of the NASA Advisory Council and the Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee, part of the Department of Transportation. Next call is Omaha, Nebraska. Good morning.
Yes, sir. First off, I'd like to commend you on hanging up on the conspiracy theorist here this morning. I doubt if President Bush and President Reagan back in the 80s had anything to do with these space shuttles exploding. My question here, sir, is I believe we're scheduled to have our next launch in March, if that's correct. And I think the American way, and this is just my opinion, I say let's let it roll. Let's go back. Let's get our people off the space station and just continue on with what we're doing. I think all 7 of those astronauts yesterday, bless their souls, would say the same thing. And I'm just wondering what your comments on that would be. Thanks.
Well, that's a very positive attitude, obviously. I think probably technically and certainly politically, we need to finish the investigation of this tragedy before we certify the shuttle as being ready for flight again. So I really doubt that the next mission in March will go as scheduled. The crew that's on board the station now, the 3 people, can get home any time that it becomes important they get home. They have the Soyuz capsule, Russian-built rescue capsule, there ready, certified for re-entry, so they'll be able to get home. They're not in any danger. Russia is launching today, or maybe has launched today, a supply ship that will bring up supplies that will let them stay aboard until June. So we can take a breath and figure out what the right next steps are before we do anything precipitate.
2 local perspectives on this. First of all, from the Dallas Morning News website, they're reporting this morning that the suspicion falls on the wing tiles, as we've been talking about this morning. Can you, in layman's term, explain what are these wing tiles and why are they necessary?
Sure. They're ceramic pieces, tiles. They're called tiles because it's not just one piece. It's hundreds of small pieces that are kind of custom fitted together on the bottom of the shuttle. They are insulation, basically. You can put the thousands of degrees of heat that is caused by the reentry into the atmosphere on one side of the tile and not have any heat on the other side. So they protect the aluminum structure of the shuttle from the heat of reentry. And if those tiles come off, and the metal of the shuttle is exposed to the heat, that's the most likely cause of what happened. If you burn through important parts of the structure, the thing is going to fall apart.
Next call is Wilmington, Delaware. Good morning.
I just have a quick correction comment. I'm really glad you guys are cutting off the theorists for some sort of terrorism and everything else. But I heard this morning that there was a a problem with the tire pressure, and that was the last call that they had. And if there had been catastrophic failure of the tire pressure, can they belly in a shuttle like that? I mean, if they had come down and realized the tire was flat upon landing and had actually made it through the descent, could they have possibly landed that thing with flat tires? That's my question, and I'll wait for your answer. Thank you.
Thank you, caller.
The answer to the question, I think, is it's highly unlikely that the shuttle comes in at a couple of 100 miles an hour. It's faster than a commercial airplane lands, and it's got a hard bottom. Now, whether you could put foam on the runway or whether you could divert it to a water landing, I'm very skeptical. But let's go back to the tire pressure. The reason that the tires went flat, if this scenario of excess heating, is they probably blew up. As the heat increased on the left wing, it would have affected the tires to the point where they ruptured and lost all their pressure. I mean, that's part of the evidence that it was excess heating that was the immediate culprit of this.
And from today's Washington Post, Michael Grunwald is reporting that there were a few possible indications of mechanical trouble from shuttle sensors in the minutes before the disaster, but the mission director said the Columbia was still, quote, flying with no problems at that time, 39 miles above Earth. Then there was a tremendous bang and a burst of light before the plume of white smoke trailing the shuttle thickened, fractured, and melted away.
Yeah. It's clear there was a catastrophic failure at some point in this process. It's what led up to that everybody wants to know.
From the Jacksonville Times-Union, also online this morning, visitors at Cape Canaveral coping with the disaster news. What's similar or what's different from a takeoff versus a landing as far as the public when they line up to see the Space Shuttle?
Well, the takeoff of a shuttle is one of the most dramatic things that you can experience. I mean, it's sitting there on the pad, relatively quiet with just some excess fuel venting, and then first the main engines are lit, and then 6 seconds later the solid rockets on the side of the shuttle are lit. That combination of explosive power is roughly equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. It's controlled, we hope. And once the solids are lit, the shuttle leaves quickly. It leaves trailing a trail of smoke, a vapor behind it. There's a bright light. There's a deep resonant kind of noise. So it's for the first 2 or 3 minutes, it's a remarkably dramatic situation. By contrast, I've only seen the shuttle land once, but it was the first landing out at Edwards Air Force Base in 1981, and it just arrives. It appears overhead. There's a double sonic boom. It's first the leading edge of the wing and then the leading edge of the tail break the sound barrier. It turns around and glides into a landing. There's no fire, no light, basically no noise except the 2 sonic booms that announce the arrival of the shuttle. So it's a much less dramatic event unless you realize where it's come from. That a few minutes earlier it was in orbit around the Earth, and now it is sitting in front of you on the ground.
A couple of other photographs also from today's Washington Post at the Air and Space Museum, which is the most popular tourism spot as far as museums in the Washington, D.C. area. Visitors lining up yesterday to hear the news conference from NASA officials, and at Johnson Space Center, the flags from America and Israel and the flowers in remembrance of those 7 astronauts. We're talking with John Logsdon, who is the director of the Space Policy Institute, also an author on America's Space Exploration Program. Next call is Tucson, Arizona. Good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Yep.
I have only a couple of quick comments on this. Man has gone to sea and he's drowned. Man has gone into air and he's gone down. I don't think we should have to have these crackpots out here saying these things about what God did or what terrorists did. I'm also interested in the fact that I realize a part of the shuttle came apart, and I realize that you're also looking into it. But what about all the little hundreds and thousands of little pieces of space junk that are floating around this Earth? Could that have a contributing factor? Thank you.
Very unlikely. The shuttle, while it's in orbit, is monitored pretty constantly by the North American Air Defense Command, which is the military organization out in Colorado Springs that tracks orbital debris from a few centimeters size up. And the shuttle is warned if its trajectory takes it anywhere near that debris and can maneuver out of the way. And that's happened on frequent missions. So it's pretty unlikely. It's not impossible, but it's pretty unlikely that a piece of debris hit the shuttle and caused this.
Columbus, Ohio, you're next. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. I'd like to thank you all for having this forum. It's quite nice to have a place where people can call in and speak with you all. I have a comment and then I have a question. My comment is that in the history of the Space Shuttle, we have had more people die in car accidents every day. We have had more people die on the streets every day than we have ever had die on the Space Shuttle. And I commend NASA and anyone who deals with this for their bravery, because every new function, every new foundation in this world has its ups and downs. My question is, if we only have 3 shuttles left, and I have heard that there is no one building them any longer, as they get older, what are we going to decide to do? I mean, are we going to further our building ability, or are we going to find other concepts in which way to safely function in outer space to and fro, or are we going to just let these 3 ride out until other things come across?
Thank you, caller. Let me just go through the 3 that remain. Discovery, which was built back in 1984. So far, it has flown 30 missions. Atlantis, which went on the launching pad in 1985, has flown 26 missions. And the Space Shuttle Endeavour, the most recent of the Space Shuttle aircrafts, now 10 years old, 11 years old, went on the launch pad in 1992. It has flown 19 missions.
Well, let me first react to the comment, because it goes to the heart of why we're here. Indeed, many people get killed in plane accidents or automobile accidents, and it doesn't become a national issue. The reason this is a national issue is because people care about astronauts, about human space flight. Unfortunately, we care most when something goes wrong. But I think this is just evidence of the fact that this activity, putting people in space, has become so much a part of American culture, of human culture, that when it goes bad, we really care and we pay lots of attention. I don't think anybody's going to build another shuttle. NASA introduced a plan last fall to build an interim craft called an orbital space plane sometime early in the next decade for taking people to and from the station, to take some of the load off of the shuttle. It won't be a big advanced technology piece of equipment. It will be a way of doing a particular job. And then there have been plans, there have been attempts now for well over a decade to work towards the technology of an advanced system that would be fully reusable, would be based on more modern technology than the shuttle. And what we're finding is that technology isn't there yet. And so there's a hard decision that if we're going to have humans in space, we're going to use the shuttle for a long time. So money is being allocated now and more in the future for upgrading, for maintaining the shuttle fleet.
We saw a number of individuals yesterday from NASA. Ron Ditmore, who is the manager of the shuttle program, and his colleague James Heflin, who is the chief flight director, as they spoke to reporters yesterday. And I want to read you what Mr. Heflin said in the text that's available this morning in the New York Times. "This is a bad day. I'm glad that I work and live in a country where when we have a bad day, we go fix it. Ron said, we'll fix it." If the Challenger is a model of what happened after that disaster with a series of commissions and investigations, what will be similar and what will be different with the Columbia?
Well, the current plans, and I hope they stick, are that there will be, of course, an intense investigation by the people closest to the shuttle program in NASA itself and its prime contractor, United Space Alliance. They're the people that really know the system well. Then there's been a second group already set up of government employees from the military, from the Federal Aviation Administration. The chair is a retired admiral, a really good guy named Hal Gaiman, who are going to also do an in-depth technical investigation. What happened after Challenger was a very high-profile White House commission chaired by former Secretary of State Bill Rogers that did a good job, but raised the visibility up to the political level of the investigation. And I think staying with people with technical qualifications and doing an intense job of finding out what went wrong and then fixing it is the right approach.
John Logsdon is with the Space Policy Institute. We'll take another look at the 7 astronauts on board that 16-day mission, Columbia, as we get a call from Detroit. Good morning.
Good morning. I want to give my condolences to the family because I can imagine what it was like waiting for your loved ones to come in and seeing something that awful. I wouldn't know what it was like, but I can just imagine. And Mr. Logsdon, I give you a compliment because I know it's a hard thing for you to sit up here and talk to us like you are with the disaster that has happened. But keep up the good work, and God bless you all.
Thank you, caller. And let me
Thank you.
follow up on the caller's question or comment with this email from a viewer in West Virginia. From what has been said this morning, would the crew have known they were in trouble before the catastrophic event?
Probably not very much before, if at all. The orbiter may have started vibrating. If I understand right, the only sensor indication that they would have seen was the pressure on the tires. That would have lit a light on their control panel. But certainly, if the thing was beginning to break up, it would have started vibrating. So there may have been a few moments of advance warning, but not long advance warning.
In this email, a follow-up to your earlier point about the investigation, Pat MacArthur of Lafayette, Louisiana. About how long do you think a thorough investigation into this tragedy would take, or is there any way to determine the length of an investigation?
Well, it depends on the quality of the evidence. This is different than an airplane accident in the sense that we don't have to look for the black boxes. All the data is already on the ground in the computers at NASA, particularly at Johnson Space Center. So all the data that we would get, we already have. It depends on what it tells us and whether you need the physical evidence of the pieces of the shuttle to figure out what happened. And we don't know that. So it's pure speculation of whether we're talking about weeks or months of an investigation. I'd like to hope that it's a matter of a few weeks, a month or two, rather than some lengthy process.
Oakland, California. Good morning. You're on C-SPAN.
Good morning, gentlemen. The question I have is, you mentioned earlier, sir, that the tiles, the ceramic tiles that prevent the body, the aluminum body of the shuttle from the heat while re-entering. Now, question I have is that at one time, I think some years ago, some tiles had fallen off as one shuttle was landing, and that was a concern at that time. And apparently, of course, in that particular flight, nothing serious happened. The question I have is, this tile, small piece of tiles, they're so difficult to manage in the sense of as to how, because the risk multiplies by the number of tiles that you have. Apparently, I would think that each piece you mentioned earlier is special in the sense that because of the shape of the body. Now, how are they glued, or how are they attached to the body, and what is in the joints of these pieces? What kind of material is used, And wouldn't you say that then, I mean, irrespective of the fact that its ceramic tile might have, it might be heat resistant, wouldn't the joints that are fillers that are in between these tiles also, the material is also, of course, subject to the same heat that the ceramic tiles are there?
Thank you, caller.
Yeah. The reason that tiles are custom fitted is so there's a very small gap between them, virtually nothing, so that no heat can get through the joint. This is done by hand. Each shuttle, after every mission, goes into a thing called the orbital processing facility and is inspected thoroughly from one end to the other, and any tile that's cracked or damaged from the mission is replaced, and that's done on a individual basis. I don't really know what kind of glue is used to attach it, but it's obviously something that's been space qualified and used over and over again.
Time and Newsweek both carrying this story on the covers of the news weeklies. We'll show you that as we get a call from Cincinnati. Go ahead, please.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
We sure can. Go ahead, caller.
Well, first off, I'd like to offer my condolences to the families of the crew that lost their life terribly yesterday in that tragic accident. And second of all, I'd like to comment that NASA has an excellent record as far as the history of safety is in the missions that we've done and the experiments and exploration that we've done. And the law of statistics, usually dictates that you do something so many times that something is bound to happen one way or the other. And it seems like at this early stage of the game to me that we are focusing on the families and their grief and trying to console them, and obviously, and most importantly, look for what caused this type of failure to happen. But I do hope that the commitment of the government and the people of America are behind NASA and what they're doing for this country and the good that they're doing for this country.
Thank you. We'll get another call from Missouri City, Texas. Good morning to you as we look at the path of the Space Shuttle Columbia breaking up over north central Texas. Go ahead, caller.
Yes, I just want to make a comment and also make a theory as to what I suspect happened. I know that they suspected that most of the problems happened on the left wing when takeoff, but apparently it didn't do much damage for them if they got out of the atmosphere to make the journey into space. But I was thinking as though if the reentry, once the shuttle got into a position where it was making the descent to make reentry into the Earth's atmosphere, that there's a lot of heat pressure on that at that point from reentry, and that there's a hydraulic system that elevates and level those flaps to get the shuttle into its position to glide to make its descent and landing.
Thank you, caller. And one more call. Rochester Hills, Minnesota. Actually, Rochester Hills, Michigan.
Hello?
Hello.
Yes, sir. The question I have, three questions. Regarding these tiles, considering how important they are, I don't understand how come they are not boxed around the shuttle for double protection. The second question I have, how come the Russians do not have the same problem? Why don't we investigate how the Russians proceed with their entry?
Well, let's take the last one first. The Russians, the Soviet Union built a shuttle-like craft called Buran in the 80s and flew it only once before deciding not to go forward. It had tiles. It used the same kind of protection system. The reason you need those tiles is because you're trying to fly the orbiter back almost like a glider, an airplane. The current Russian system uses the same technology we used on Mercury and Gemini and Apollo, which is a re-entry shield that burns off and is one-time use as the capsule comes back into the atmosphere. So the shuttle as a reusable craft couldn't use that system. Why are there not two layers of tiles around the shuttle rather than one? I think the judgment is that 1 is enough, as long as the tiles stay on, and 2 would make it a heavier and a rather ungainly piece of equipment.
The Space Shuttle Columbia, the oldest of the space shuttles, built to withstand 100 missions. It's flown under 30. Was that on target with what NASA had expected at this stage of the game?
Now, when NASA started the shuttle program in the early 70s, they were predicting 50 or 60 flights a year. At the time of the Challenger accident in 1986, the projected flight rate was 24 a year. So nobody really conceived when these shuttles were built that the 28th mission of Columbia, yesterday's mission, would be, 22 years after the Columbia started flying. That's not to say that it was too old, because the system had been maintained. Columbia had just gone through a major overhaul within the past year or so. And I think the other 3 systems are by the way, they're the only 3 that could go to the space station. Columbia could not go to the space station. So it was a little too heavy to get into the orbit you need to get to go to the space station, and it hadn't been fitted with the docking mechanism. So we haven't lost anything in terms of capability to have the shuttle be the transportation vehicle linked to the space station.
Before we take our last call, a couple of quick questions, if you can answer them. First of all, what is the cost of a space shuttle?
To build one or to fly one?
To build one.
The last one that was built, Endeavour, which was built after Challenger, cost about $2.2 billion. And that's because we had some spare parts available. So, you couldn't... Right now, I don't think you could build one for almost any cost.
And how many people are involved in any mission on the ground?
Thousands. From the people that prepare the shuttle for launch, to the launch crew, to the people that manage the shuttle at Johnson when they're in orbit, to all the contractors and people around the country that back the flight control crew. So this is an endeavor of thousands of people.
And finally, do you know, that was the earlier question about the cost of a mission. Do you know what the average price per mission is for NASA?
Well, it depends on how many missions you fly each year. The shuttle budget is somewhere around $3.5 billion a year. So if you're flying I think the maximum now is planned is 5 flights a year. So to maintain the system and to fly it costs about $700 million a flight. But to add one more flight would probably cost less than $100 million. Still big numbers.
Next call is Jewel, Iowa, for John Logsdon. Good morning. Jewel, Iowa, good morning.
Sir?
Go ahead, caller.
Go ahead. I'd like to give thanks to NASA for all the missions we've had going up there and coming back to our space station, to outer space, to the moon, and back. And we have this one great accident, and everybody is pointing fingers at NASA. I think they've done a great job in bringing our astronauts back here safely to the Earth. And it was God who kept all this debris from hitting someone on Earth. God did not bring this thing down like people keep calling in, pointing to us about. God is not that kind of person. God is a loving person, a protective person. And I like to think we ought to give thanks to God for not letting anybody here on Earth get hurt. All that debris falling, just think about it. And that's all I have to say about it.
Thank you, caller. How much debris, in fact, do you think did fall? How much evaporated?
I think most of it fell. And that's a lot of debris. We've seen pictures all day of fairly sizable pieces. I heard one report last night of something the size of a small auto that ended up in the water in a reservoir somewhere in southeast Texas. So I think most of the metal debris probably landed on the surface of the Earth.
John Logsdon, you received a call yesterday at about 9:15 with the first reports that there was a problem with the mission. What was your initial reaction?
Kind of a sickness, a hole in the pit of your stomach that says, oh no. Like the rest of us close to the shuttle process and the space process, you begin to take things a bit for granted. And so I wasn't up watching the reentry, because there have been lots of reentries. It was a part of the shuttle profile that there hadn't been problems with before. So to first hear the reports and then begin to see the videos on television, it's a sense of horribleness of this happening in terms of what it, the loss of 7 human lives, the impact on the program. It is exactly the worst sort of thing that could happen.
And my very last question for you, as this moves to Capitol Hill, who here in Washington will be point people when it comes to NASA, its budget, and whether there is a future shuttle program or the future of the space program in general?
Well, first of all, it will be the White House. It's time for the president to exercise some leadership here and to give his confidence to NASA's leadership, to Sean O'Keefe and his team, to see this through. On the Hill, it will be the space subcommittees of the Senate and the House, and to be very frank, I'm not sure those committees have organized themselves for this Congress to name the new chair people yet. The overall chair in the House Science Committee will be Sherwood Bullard of Washington. Clearly, Bill Nelson is now in the minority in the Senate, but a senator who has flown in space is going to play an important role in these debates.
John Logsdon of the Space Policy Institute, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.